I arrived at Ashwood Hall on a morning so gray the sky seemed to hold its breath. The carriage rattled over the gravel drive, and I clutched my worn leather bag against my chest, feeling the familiar ache of something long buried rising in my throat. I had not wanted to come here. I had spent 5 years building a life far from this country, far from memory, far from him. But desperation is a cruel master, and when the letter arrived offering me a position as governess to the young son of the Duke of Ashwood, I had no choice but to accept. I told myself it would be different. I told myself I could endure it. I told myself I would not feel anything at all. I was wrong the moment I stepped through the door. The entrance hall was vast and cold, all dark wood and stone, with portraits lining the walls like silent judges. A housekeeper, older and stern, greeted me with a nod that barely passed for courtesy, and led me through corridors that smelled of beeswax and old roses. My heart hammered in my chest. I had not seen the Duke since that night. The night that broke me, the night that made me. The night I became a mother and lost everything in the same breath. She stopped before a heavy oak door and knocked twice. A voice called from within, low and commanding, and I felt my knees weaken. The housekeeper pushed the door open and gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside, and there he was. He stood by the window, his back to me, hands clasped behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black. The years had not softened him. If anything, they had made him harder, more distant, more untouchable. He did not turn immediately, and I was grateful for the moment to steady my breath, to remind myself that I was no longer the girl who had loved him in secret, who had given herself to him in a moment of reckless hope. When he finally turned, his eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw something flicker there. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. But it vanished so quickly, I might have imagined it. He regarded me with the cool detachment of a man accustomed to command. "I have been told you come highly recommended," he said. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, deep and careful, each word chosen with precision. "My son is 6 years old. He has been without a mother for 3 years. He is difficult. I need someone who will not indulge his tantrums, but who will not break his spirit either. Do you understand?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. I understood far more than he knew. He gestured toward a chair, and I sat, my hands folded tightly in my lap. He did not sit. He remained standing, as if the distance between us was necessary, as if he sensed something dangerous in the air and needed to keep it at bay. "You will take your meals with the staff," he continued. "You will have Sundays free. You will not speak of my family to anyone outside this house, and you will report to me weekly on my son's progress. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, Your Grace," I whispered. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a hand pressing against my chest. Then he nodded and turned back to the window, dismissing me without another word. I rose and left the room, my legs trembling beneath my skirts. The housekeeper was waiting in the corridor, her expression unreadable. She led me up 2 flights of stairs to the nursery, where a small boy sat on the floor surrounded by wooden soldiers. He did not look up when we entered. "Master Edward," the housekeeper said, her tone softening slightly. "This is Miss Grey. She will be your new governess." The boy remained motionless, his dark head bent over his toys. I stepped closer, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. And then, slowly, he lifted his face. I gasped. It was not a sound I meant to make, but I could not help it. The child had my eyes, not his father's pale gray, but mine, dark brown, flecked with gold, wide and watchful. The shape of his mouth, the curve of his cheek, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Every detail was a mirror held up to my own face. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to pull me under. It could not be. It was impossible. I had been told my child had been sent away, adopted by a family far from here, that I would never see him again. That was the price I had paid for my sin. That was the bargain I had made to survive. And yet, here he was, my son. The housekeeper was speaking, but I could not hear her. The room seemed to tilt and blur, and I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. The boy watched me with those eyes, my eyes, and I saw no recognition there, no spark of connection. He did not know me. He could not know me, but I knew him. I knew him in the marrow of my bones. "Miss Gray, are you unwell?" the housekeeper asked, her voice sharp with concern. I forced myself to breathe, to nod, to smile. "I am quite well," I managed, "only a bit tired from the journey." She looked unconvinced, but said nothing more. She left me there, alone with the boy, and I sank into the chair, my hands shaking so violently I had to clasp them together to stop them. Edward, my Edward though he did not know it, returned to his soldiers, arranging them in careful rows. He did not speak. He did not ask my name or where I had come from. He simply played, lost in his own small world, and I watched him, my heart breaking and mending all at once. How had this happened? How had my child, the baby I had held for only a few stolen moments before they took him from my arms, ended up here in the house of the man who had fathered him? Had the Duke known? Had he arranged it? Or was this some cruel twist of fate, a punishment for the choice I had made 5 years ago? I did not know, but I would find out. The days that followed were a strange and terrible dream. I taught Edward his letters and numbers, read to him from books of poetry and history, walked with him in the gardens while the autumn leaves fell around us like whispered secrets. He was a quiet child, slow to trust, but not unkind. He did not smile often, but when he did, it was like the sun breaking through clouds, and I felt my heart clench with a love so fierce it frightened me. I tried to keep my distance, to remain professional, to remind myself that I was only his governess, nothing more. But every time I looked at him, I saw myself. I saw the girl I had been, the choices I had made, the life I had lost. And I wondered if he felt it too. Some invisible thread binding us together, some knowledge buried too deep for words. The Duke rarely came to the nursery. When he did, his visits were brief and formal. He would ask Edward about his lessons, nod approvingly at his progress, and leave without so much as a glance in my direction. It was as if I did not exist, as if the woman he had once known, however briefly, had been erased entirely. But I existed. I was here, and I would not be invisible forever. It was on a rainy afternoon, 3 weeks after my arrival, that everything changed. I was sitting with Edward in the drawing room, helping him with his sums, when the door opened and a woman entered. She was older, perhaps 60, dressed in black silk with a string of pearls at her throat. Her hair was silver, swept back in an elegant coif, and her eyes were sharp and assessing. She moved with the authority of someone who had never been questioned, never been denied. The Dowager Duchess, the Duke's mother. She looked at me, then at Edward, and her expression shifted, just slightly, like a shadow passing over water. "You are the new governess," she said. It was not a question. I stood and curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." She crossed the room slowly, her gaze never leaving Edward. He had gone still, his pencil frozen above the paper. She reached out and touched his hair, a gesture that might have been tender if not for the tension in her fingers. "He has grown," she murmured, almost to herself. Then she turned to me, and her eyes narrowed. "What is your name?" "Miss Gray, Your Grace." "Where are you from, Miss Gray?" I hesitated. "From the north, Your Grace. I was employed by a family in Yorkshire before coming here." Her gaze did not waver. "And before that?" I felt my pulse quicken. Before that, I was. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I was in service to a household in London. She studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment, and I had the terrible sense that she could see through me, that she knew every secret I carried, every lie I had told. Then she looked back at Edward, and her expression softened, just a fraction. "He is a beautiful child," she said quietly. "He has his father's bearing, but his eyes—" She trailed off, and I felt the room grow colder. She turned to me again, and this time there was something almost accusatory in her gaze. "His eyes are unusual, are they not? Not like his father's, not like his mother's either." I said nothing. I could not. She took a step closer, and I smelled her perfume, roses, and something darker, something almost bitter. "Tell me, Miss Grey," she said softly, "why does the boy have your eyes?" The world stopped. I stared at her, unable to move, unable to breathe. Edward looked up from his paper, confused, and the Dowager Duchess smiled, a thin, knowing smile that made my blood run cold. "I thought so," she whispered. And then she turned and left the room, leaving me standing there, trembling, with the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hall like a verdict I could not escape. Edward tugged at my sleeve. "Miss Grey," he said, his voice small and uncertain. "Why did grandmother say that?" I knelt beside him, my hands shaking, and forced myself to smile. "It is nothing, my darling," I whispered. "Nothing at all." But I knew in that moment that everything had changed. The truth was no longer buried. It was awake, and it was coming for me. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling while the rain drummed against the window, and tried to make sense of what had happened. The Dowager Duchess knew, or suspected, or perhaps she had always known and had been waiting for this moment, watching me like a cat watches a mouse before the pounce. I should have left immediately. I should have packed my belongings and disappeared into the night, just as I had done 5 years ago when they took my baby from my arms and sent me away with a handful of coins and a warning never to return. But I could not leave. Not now. Not when I had found him again. My Edward, my son, the child I had mourned every day since his birth. How had he come to be here? The question circled endlessly in my mind, refusing to settle. I had been told he would be given to a good family, somewhere far away, where no one would know the shame of his birth. I had believed them because I had no choice. I was 16, alone, and terrified. The Duke had been 24, engaged to be married, the heir to a fortune and a title that stretched back centuries. What we had shared was brief and reckless. A single night when he had found me crying in the garden after a ball, when he had spoken to me with a kindness I had never known from someone of his station, when I had foolishly, desperately believed that he might see me as something more than a servant girl. I had been wrong. When I told him I was with child, he had looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if that night had never happened. He had arranged for me to be sent away, quietly, discreetly, with enough money to see me through the birth and a few months beyond. He had married his Duchess. He had moved on, and I had tried to do the same. But now I understood. Edward had not been given to strangers. He had been brought here, to Ashwood Hall, raised as the Duke's legitimate son, which meant the Duchess, the woman he had married, had either died in childbirth or shortly after, and the Duke had claimed my child as his own, erasing me from the story entirely. The cruelty of it took my breath away. He had taken everything from me. My child, my future, even the truth. And now his mother knew, or suspected, and I was trapped. The next morning, I rose early and went to the nursery, determined to act as if nothing had changed. Edward was already awake, sitting by the window with a book in his lap, though he was not reading. He was staring out at the gray morning, his small face solemn. "Good morning, Edward," I said, keeping my voice light. He turned to me, and I saw something in his expression that made my heart ache. He looked lost, as if he were searching for something he could not name. "Miss Grey," he said quietly, Why did grandmother say I have your eyes? I crossed the room and knelt beside him, taking his small hands in mine. She was only making an observation, I said gently. Sometimes people notice similarities between others. It does not mean anything. He studied me with those dark eyes, my eyes, and I wondered how much he understood, how much he felt without knowing why. But I have father's name, he said, and grandmother says I have his blood. Why would I have your eyes? I swallowed hard, searching for words that would soothe him without revealing the truth. You have your own eyes, Edward, I said softly. They are yours alone, and they are beautiful. He seemed satisfied with that, or at least willing to let the question go, and we returned to our lessons. But the unease remained, a shadow hanging over us both. That afternoon, I was summoned to the Duke's study. I went with dread coiling in my stomach, each step feeling heavier than the last. The housekeeper led me to the door, knocked once, and left me there alone. I heard his voice from within, calm and measured, telling me to enter. He was seated behind his desk, a stack of papers before him, a pen in his hand. He did not look up when I entered, and I stood there, waiting, my hands folded, my heart pounding. Finally, he set the pen down and raised his eyes to mine. There was no warmth in his gaze, no recognition of what we had once been to each other, however briefly. He looked at me as if I were a problem to be solved, nothing more. My mother spoke to me this morning, he said. His voice was cold, clipped. She expressed certain concerns about you. I said nothing. I did not trust myself to speak. She believes, he continued, that you bear a resemblance to my son. She finds it troubling. I forced myself to meet his gaze, though every instinct told me to look away. I cannot help my appearance, Your Grace, I said quietly. No, he said, you cannot. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Tell me, Miss Gray, where were you 5 years ago? The question struck me like a blow. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I kept my voice steady. I was in service, Your Grace. In London. To whom? A family in Mayfair. They have since moved abroad. Convenient, he said softly. Silence stretched between us, taut and dangerous. I could see the calculations behind his eyes, the suspicion taking root. But he could not accuse me outright, not without proof, not without risking the scandal that would destroy him as surely as it would destroy me. You will continue your duties, he said finally, but you will keep your distance from my mother. If she speaks to you again, you will tell me immediately. Do you understand? Yes, Your Grace. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, and I left the study, my legs trembling so badly I had to stop in the corridor to steady myself. He knew. He had to know. But he was not ready to admit it, not ready to face what it would mean. I returned to the nursery, and the days passed in a strange, strained silence. Edward and I continued our lessons, our walks in the garden, our quiet hours in the library. But I felt eyes on me everywhere I went. The servants whispered when I passed. The Dowager Duchess watched me from across rooms, her gaze sharp and knowing. And then, one evening, she came to me. I was in the nursery, tidying up after Edward had gone to bed, when the door opened and she stepped inside. She closed it behind her, softly, deliberately, and I felt my heart begin to race. She did not speak at first. She crossed to the window and looked out at the darkening sky, her hands clasped before her. I waited, hardly daring to breathe. When she finally turned to me, her expression was unreadable. I know who you are, she said quietly. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. I know what happened 5 years ago, she continued. I know about the child. My son thought he could bury the truth, but the truth has a way of rising to the surface, does it not? I said nothing, There was nothing I could say. She took a step closer, and I saw something in her eyes that I had not expected. Not anger, not disgust, but something almost like pity. "You were very young," she said. "Too young to understand the consequences of what you had done. My son should have known better." She paused, her gaze hardening. But he did not. And now we are all bound by the choices made that night. I found my voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want to know what you intend to do. You have come into this house, into my grandson's life, and you have stirred up a past that should have remained buried. So I ask you, Miss Gray, what is it you want?" I met her gaze, and for the first time since I had arrived at Ashwood Hall, I felt something other than fear. I felt a spark of defiance, a flicker of the girl I had once been before shame and loss had broken me. "I want my son," I said. She stared at me, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. But then she laughed, a soft, bitter sound. "Your son," she repeated. "He is not your son, Miss Gray. He is the heir to a dukedom. He is my grandson. He is everything you can never be." "He is mine," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I carried him. I gave birth to him. I held him for 5 minutes before they took him from me, and I have mourned him every day since. You cannot tell me he is not mine." Her expression softened, just slightly, and she sighed. "Perhaps you are right," she said quietly. "Perhaps he is yours in ways that matter more than blood or title. But that does not change the fact that if the truth comes out, he will be ruined. He will lose everything, his name, his inheritance, his place in the world. Is that what you want for him?" I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "No," I whispered. "Then you must leave," she said. "You must go, and never return. And take this secret with you. It is the only way to protect him." I shook my head. I cannot leave him again." She studied me for a long moment, and then she nodded, as if she had expected this answer. "Then we have a problem, Miss Gray, because I will not allow you to destroy my family." She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "Think carefully about what you do next," she said, "for his sake, if not for your own." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the dim nursery, with the weight of her words pressing down on me like a stone. I sank into a chair, my hands covering my face, and I wept. I wept for the girl I had been, for the choices I had made, for the son I had lost and found again, only to lose him once more. I wept until there were no tears left, until I was hollow and empty and numb. And then I heard a sound. I looked up, and there, standing in the doorway, was Edward. He was in his nightclothes, his feet bare, his face pale in the lamplight. "Miss Gray," he said softly, "why are you crying?" I wiped my eyes quickly, trying to compose myself. "I am just tired, my darling. You should be in bed." But he did not move. He crossed the room and climbed into my lap, wrapping his small arms around my neck. I held him, feeling his warmth, his heartbeat against mine, and I knew I could not let him go. Not again. Not ever. "Do not be sad," he whispered. "I am here." And in that moment I made my decision. I would not leave. I would not hide. I would fight for him, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences, because he was mine, and I was his, and nothing, not even the weight of an empire, could change that. The weeks that followed were a quiet war. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful and watchful, performing my duties with precision while every nerve in my body remained alert. The Dowager Duchess did not speak to me again, but I felt her presence everywhere. A constant pressure, a reminder that she was waiting for me to make a mistake. The Duke kept his distance as well, though I sometimes caught him watching me from across a room, his expression unreadable. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he suspected the truth or whether he was still convincing himself that I was merely a stranger who happened to resemble his son. Men are skilled at believing what is convenient, and the truth, in this case, was anything but. Edward, meanwhile, grew more attached to me with each passing day. He followed me from room to room, his small hand often reaching for mine, his questions endless and curious. He asked me about the world beyond Ashwood Hall, about places I had been, about stories I had heard. I answered as best I could, weaving tales that were half memory and half invention, trying to give him the wonder and lightness that his young life seemed to lack. He rarely spoke of his father. When he did, it was with a kind of distant respect, the way one might speak of a mountain or a storm, something vast and immovable. He never mentioned his mother, and I did not ask. I had learned from the servants that the late Duchess had died shortly after Edward was born, though the circumstances were vague and no one seemed willing to speak of her. I suspected there was more to the story, something dark and carefully hidden, but I did not press. I had my own secrets to guard. It was in the 4th week of my employment that I found the letter. I had been tidying the Duke's study, a task that fell to me after the housekeeper complained of her rheumatism. The room was lined with books and smelled of leather and tobacco, and I moved quietly, dusting the shelves and straightening papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible. I should not have looked. I knew better. But as I lifted a stack of correspondence to dust beneath it, a single sheet of paper slipped free and fluttered to the floor. I bent to retrieve it, and my eyes fell on the words before I could stop myself. It was dated 5 years ago, just weeks after Edward's birth. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and the ink had faded slightly with time, but the words were still clear. "My dearest James," it began, and I felt my heart begin to pound. "I know you believe this arrangement to be for the best, but I cannot continue to live this lie. The child is not mine, as you well know, and yet you insist that I claim him as such. You ask me to bear the weight of your indiscretion, to raise the son of a servant girl as if he were my own, while you go on as if nothing has changed. I cannot do it. I will not do it. I have agreed to your terms only because I have no choice, because my family's debts bind me to you as surely as any vow. But do not mistake my compliance for acceptance. I will never love this child. I will never forgive you for what you have done. If there is any mercy in this world, I will not live long enough to see him grow into a reminder of your betrayal." The letter was unsigned, but I knew who had written it. The Duchess, Edward's supposed mother, the woman who had died 3 years ago. I stood there, frozen, the letter trembling in my hands. She had known. She had known from the beginning that Edward was not hers, that he was the child of a servant, of me, and she had hated him for it, hated me for it, hated the Duke for forcing her into this charade. The door opened behind me, and I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The Duke stood in the doorway, his expression cold and still as stone. In my hand, the letter felt like a burning coal. "Put that down," he said quietly. I set it on the desk, my hands shaking. "I did not mean to read it, Your Grace." It fell, and I only... He crossed the room in 3 strides and snatched the letter from the desk, his jaw tight. "You had no right," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I stepped back, my pulse racing. "I am sorry, Your Grace. I did not. Do you know what you have done?" He turned on me, and for the first time since I had arrived, I saw real emotion in his face, anger, and beneath it, something that looked almost like fear. "Do you understand what that letter represents? What it could do to my son if it were ever made public?" "I do," I whispered. "I understand." He stared at me, and I saw the battle waging behind his eyes. He wanted to dismiss me, to send me away before I could do any more damage, but he could not, because I knew too much, because I was too close to the truth. "Who are you?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I met his gaze, and I made a choice. I am the woman you have tried to forget, I said. I am the mother of your son. The silence that followed was suffocating. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stared at me, and I saw the recognition dawn in his eyes, slow and terrible, like the rising of a storm. No, he said, but the word had no conviction. Yes, I said, 5 years ago in the garden, after the ball. You found me crying. You spoke to me. You were kind. And then, stop, he said, his voice breaking. Just stop. But I could not stop. The words were spilling out of me now, all the pain and anger and grief I had carried for so long. You sent me away, I said. You gave me money and told me never to come back. You took my child from me and gave him to a woman who hated him, who wished him dead. And now you stand here and pretend you do not know me, pretend that none of it ever happened. But it did happen. And he is mine. Edward is mine. He sank into his chair, his head in his hands, and for a moment I thought he might weep. But when he looked up again, his face was hard, closed off. You cannot prove it, he said. There is no record, no evidence, only your word against mine. I have his eyes, I said. Your mother saw it. You see it. Everyone who looks at us together will see it. He stood abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. Then you will leave, he said. Tonight. I will give you enough money to start a new life, somewhere far from here. But you will never speak of this again. You will never contact him. You will disappear, just as you did before. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I will not leave him again. You have no choice. I have every choice, I said, my voice trembling with fury. He is my son. I carried him. I bore him. I have mourned him every day for 5 years. You cannot take him from me again. He took a step toward me, and I saw something dangerous in his eyes. If you do not leave, he said quietly, I will destroy you. I will tell the world you are a liar, a blackmailer, a madwoman who has invented this story to extort money from me. I will have you arrested. I will see you hanged if I must. Do you understand me? I understood. I understood that he was terrified, that he would do anything to protect his name, his title, his carefully constructed life. But I also understood that I had nothing left to lose. Do what you must, I said, but I will not leave him. He stared at me for a long moment, and then he turned and walked to the door. When he reached it, he paused, his hand on the frame. You are a fool, he said, without looking back, and you will regret this. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the study, trembling and breathless, with the weight of what I had done crashing down on me. I had declared war, and I had no idea how I would survive it. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed, listening to the house settle around me. I expected to be dismissed in the morning, to be dragged from my room and thrown into the street. But morning came, and no one came for me. The housekeeper brought my breakfast as usual. The maids nodded to me in the corridors. It was as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The Duke did not summon me again. He did not come to the nursery. He avoided me entirely, and I understood that he was trying to decide what to do, how to handle the problem I represented. I knew I was living on borrowed time. And then, 3 days later, the Dowager Duchess came to me again. She found me in the garden, where I had taken Edward to gather autumn leaves for a project. He was laughing, his arms full of red and gold, and I was watching him with a joy so fierce it hurt. Miss Grey, she said, and I turned to find her standing on the path, her black shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her expression grave. I sent Edward ahead with his basket and walked to meet her. Your Grace, I said quietly. She looked past me at Edward, and I saw something soften in her face. He is happy with you, she said, happier than I have ever seen him. I said nothing. She turned her gaze to me. My son told me what happened, what you told him. I braced myself for her anger, her condemnation. But when she spoke again, her voice was weary. "I do not know what to do," she said. "I do not know how to protect him, how to protect all of us." "Tell me the truth," I said. "How did Edward come to be here? How did he become the Duke's heir?" She sighed, and for the first time, she looked old. "My son was engaged to marry Lady Catherine when he learned of your condition," she said. "He could not break the engagement without scandal. So he married her, and when your child was born, he brought him here and told her she would claim him as her own. He threatened her family's reputation if she refused. She hated him for it, hated the child. She took her own life 2 years after the marriage, unable to bear the shame of it. I felt the ground shift beneath me. She killed herself. She nodded. And my son buried the truth with her. He declared the boy his legitimate heir, and no one questioned it. Until you." I looked at Edward, playing in the leaves, innocent and unaware. "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we must find a way forward, because if this secret comes out, it will destroy us all, including him." "Then help me," I said. "Help me find a way to be his mother without destroying him." She studied me for a long moment, and then, to my astonishment, she nodded. "Very well," she said, "but you must trust me, and you must be patient." "I will," I said. And so, an unlikely alliance was born, one that would change everything. The Dowager Duchess was a woman of strategy and precision, qualities I had not expected to work in my favor. In the days that followed our conversation in the garden, she began to weave a careful plan, one that would allow me to remain in Edward's life without exposing the truth that could ruin us all. She was not doing this out of kindness. She made that clear. She was doing it for Edward, and for the preservation of her family's name. But her motivations mattered less to me than the result. I would take whatever mercy I could find. She began by altering my position in the household. I was no longer merely a governess confined to the nursery. I was elevated, subtly, to the role of companion and tutor, given access to the drawing rooms and the library, invited to take meals in the smaller dining room rather than with the servants. It was a calculated move, designed to make my presence seem natural, unremarkable, so that when Edward grew older and the resemblance between us became even more pronounced, it would not seem so strange that I had been kept close. The Duke, for his part, did not oppose these changes. He said nothing at all. He withdrew further into his study and his estate business, avoiding both me and his son with equal determination. I understood his torment, though I could not forgive it. He was a man trapped between duty and guilt, unable to reconcile the two, and so he chose silence. But Edward noticed. Children always do. One evening, as I was reading to him by the fire, he set down the wooden horse he had been playing with and looked up at me with those dark, searching eyes. "Miss Grey," he said, "why does father not come to see me anymore?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Your father is very busy, darling. He has many responsibilities. He used to come every week," Edward said quietly. "He used to ask about my lessons and take me riding. But now he does not. Did I do something wrong?" My heart broke for him. I set the book aside and pulled him close, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "You have done nothing wrong," I said firmly. "Nothing at all. Your father loves you very much. Then why does he stay away?" I did not have an answer for that. Or rather, I had an answer, but it was not one I could give to a child, so I simply held him and let him feel what words could not convey. The Dowager Duchess observed all of this with a keen eye. She began to spend more time with Edward as well, taking him for walks, teaching him the history of the estate, preparing him for the role he would one day inherit. She was gentler with him than I had expected, and I realized that despite her coldness, despite her obsession with reputation and propriety, she genuinely cared for the boy. Perhaps she saw in him a chance at redemption, a way to undo the damage her son had caused. Winter came early that year, bringing with it snow and ice and long, dark evenings. The house grew quieter, more insular, and I found myself spending more time alone with my thoughts. I wrote letters I never sent, pouring out my heart onto paper and then burning the pages in the fire. I walked the corridors at night when I could not sleep, listening to the house breathe and creak around me. It was on one of these restless nights that I encountered him. I had gone down to the library to find a book, thinking that reading might calm my mind. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the room, and I was standing before the shelves when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, the Duke. He stood in the doorway, a glass of brandy in his hand, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. We stared at each other, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I did not expect to find you here," he said finally. His voice was rough, tired. "I could not sleep," I replied. He stepped into the room, moving slowly, as if the weight of the world were pressing down on his shoulders. "Neither could I," he said. He crossed to the fire and stood before it, staring into the flames. I remained by the shelves, unsure whether to leave or stay. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Then, without looking at me, he spoke. "I remember you," he said quietly. The words sent a jolt through me. I gripped the edge of the shelf to steady myself. "I remember that night," he continued. "I remember finding you in the garden. You were crying because one of the guests had been cruel to you. I do not even remember what he said, but I remember your face. You looked so young, so lost." "I was 16, I said softly. He nodded. "I know." He took a drink, then set the glass down on the mantel. "I should not have touched you. I should not have let it happen. But I did. And I have regretted it every day since." "Have you?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Or have you simply regretted the consequences?" He turned to face me, and I saw the anguish in his eyes. "Both," he said. "I regret all of it." "You took him from me," I said, my voice breaking. "You took my baby, and you gave him to a woman who hated him. You let me believe he was lost to me forever, and now you stand here and tell me you have regrets?" "What would you have had me do?" he demanded, his composure cracking. "Acknowledge him? Claim a servant's child as my own? I would have been ruined. My family would have been ruined. He would have been branded a bastard, cast out, despised. I did what I thought was best for him." "You did what was best for yourself," I said. He flinched as if I had struck him. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "Perhaps you are right." He turned back to the fire and I saw his shoulders sag. "When Catherine died," he said, "I thought I would feel relief, but I only felt more guilt. She hated me. She hated him, and I could not blame her. I had forced her into a marriage built on lies, and it destroyed her." "She destroyed herself," I said. "Because of me," he replied, "because of what I did." We stood in silence, the fire crackling between us, and I felt something shift in the air. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "I want you to acknowledge him," I said. "Not publicly, not in a way that would ruin him, but privately, in your heart. I want you to see him as he is, as our son." He closed his eyes, and I saw a tear slip down his cheek. "I do see him," he whispered. "Every time I look at him, I see what I have done, and it is unbearable." "Then stop hiding," I said. "Stop punishing him for your mistakes. Be his father." He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I saw something raw and desperate in his gaze. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. I considered the question. Could I forgive him for the pain he had caused me, for the years I had lost, for the lies that had shaped all our lives? I did not know, But I knew that holding on to my anger would only poison what little chance we had of moving forward. "I do not know," I said honestly, "but I can try." He nodded slowly, and I saw something like hope flicker in his expression. "Then let me try as well," he said. And so, another fragile alliance was formed. In the weeks that followed, the Duke began to emerge from his self-imposed exile. He came to the nursery more often, spending time with Edward, teaching him to ride again, reading with him in the evenings. It was tentative and awkward at first, as if he had forgotten how to be a father, but Edward responded with an eagerness that broke my heart. The boy had been starving for his father's attention, and now that he had it, he bloomed. I watched them together, and I felt a bittersweet ache in my chest. This was what I had wanted, what I had fought for. But it also meant stepping back, allowing the Duke to claim a space in Edward's life that I could never fully occupy. The Dowager Duchess noticed the change as well. One afternoon, as we took tea together in the drawing room, she regarded me with an expression that might have been approval. "You have done well," she said. "My son is beginning to heal, and Edward is thriving." "I am glad," I said. "But there is still the matter of the future," she continued. "Edward will grow older. Questions will be asked. We must be prepared. What do you suggest?" She set down her teacup and folded her hands in her lap. "I suggest we tell him the truth," she said. "When he is old enough to understand. Not the whole world, but him. He deserves to know where he comes from." I stared at her, astonished. "You would do that?" "For his sake, yes," she said. "Secrets have a way of rotting from the inside. Better to bring them into the light on our own terms." "And if he hates us for it?" I asked. "If he cannot forgive the lies?" "Then we will face that together," she said. I felt tears prick my eyes, and I nodded. "Thank you," I whispered. She reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture so unexpected it left me speechless. "You are stronger than I gave you credit for," she said. "You have earned your place here." It was the closest she would ever come to an apology, and I accepted it as such. That night, as I tucked Edward into bed, he looked up at me with a sleepy smile. "Miss Grey," he said, "I am happy." I smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I am glad, my darling. Father says we are going to London in the spring," he said, "and that I may bring you with me. Will you come?" "I will," I promised. He closed his eyes, still smiling, and I sat beside him until he fell asleep. As I rose to leave, I paused at the door and looked back at him. This beautiful boy who was mine and not mine, who carried my blood and another woman's name. I had fought for him. I had risked everything for him. And now, finally, I was beginning to see the reward. But I also knew that the hardest part was still to come. Because the truth, once spoken, could never be taken back, and we would all have to live with the consequences. Spring came to Ashwood Hall like a benediction, washing away the gray weight of winter and filling the gardens with color and birdsong. Edward had grown taller over the cold months, his features sharpening, his resemblance to me becoming more pronounced with each passing day. He was 7 now, bright and curious, and though he still called me Miss Grey, there were moments when I caught him looking at me with a puzzlement that made my heart ache. He was beginning to sense something, some truth hovering just beyond his understanding. The Dowager Duchess had been right. The time was coming when we would have to tell him. But first, we had promised him London. We departed on a bright morning in April, the 3 of us traveling together in the Duke's carriage, while the servants followed behind with our trunks. Edward sat between his father and me, chattering excitedly about the city, about the places he had read of but never seen. The Duke listened with a patience I had never witnessed before, answering his questions, pointing out landmarks as we drew closer to the capital. I watched them together, and I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of fear and anger finally beginning to unravel. We stayed in the Duke's townhouse in Mayfair, a grand residence of white stone and tall windows that overlooked a private square. Edward was enchanted by everything, racing from room to room, exploring every corner with the boundless energy of childhood. I followed at a distance, smiling at his delight, grateful for this moment of simple joy. But joy, I had learned, was always fleeting. On our third evening in London, as I was helping Edward prepare for bed, there was a knock at the nursery door. The Duke entered, his expression grave, and I felt my stomach tighten with apprehension. "Edward," he said gently, "would you give Miss Grey and me a moment alone?" Edward looked between us, sensing the shift in the air, but he nodded obediently and went to his room. The Duke closed the door behind him and turned to face me. "My mother has received a letter," he said quietly, "from someone claiming to have information about Edward's birth." The blood drained from my face. "Who?" He shook his head. "The letter was unsigned, but whoever wrote it knows the truth, or enough of it to cause damage." "What do they want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Money," he said, "a substantial sum in exchange for their silence." I sank into a chair, my hands trembling. This was what I had feared from the beginning, the sword hanging over all of us, waiting to fall. Someone had discovered our secret, and now they would use it to destroy us. "What will you do?" I whispered. "I do not know," he said, and for the first time I heard genuine fear in his voice. "If I pay, they will only demand more. If I refuse, they will go to the papers. Either way, Edward will suffer." We sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us like a stone. Then, slowly, an idea began to form in my mind. It was dangerous, perhaps even reckless, but it was the only way I could see to protect my son. "Let me meet with them," I said. The Duke stared at me. "Absolutely not. I am the one they want to expose," I said. "I am the servant girl who bore your child. Let me speak to them. Let me offer them something they cannot refuse." "And what would that be?" he asked. "The truth," I said, "but on our terms." He shook his head. "You are not making sense." I stood and crossed to him, taking his hands in mine. "Listen to me," I said urgently. "Whoever wrote this letter wants power over us. They want to watch us scramble and beg. But what if we take that power away? What if we tell Edward the truth ourselves before they can? What if we control the narrative?" He pulled his hands away, pacing the room. "You want to tell him now? He is only 7. He is old enough to understand love," I said. "He is old enough to understand that sometimes circumstances are complicated, but that does not change what matters most." "And what is that?" he asked bitterly. "That he is wanted," I said. "That he is loved. That he belongs." The Duke stopped pacing and looked at me, and I saw the war raging behind his eyes. Finally he nodded. "Very well," he said. "We tell him. Together." The next morning we brought Edward into the drawing room. The Dowager Duchess was there as well, her face composed, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Edward looked around at all of us, his expression uncertain. "Am I in trouble?" he asked quietly. "No, darling," I said, kneeling before him and taking his hands. "You are not in trouble, but we need to speak with you about something very important." He nodded, his eyes wide and trusting, and I felt my heart break all over again. The Duke cleared his throat. "Edward," he began, "you know that your mother died when you were very young." Edward nodded. "What you do not know," the Duke continued, his voice carefully steady, "is that the woman we told you was your mother was not the woman who gave birth to you." Edward's brow furrowed in confusion. "I do not understand." I took a breath and spoke, my voice trembling. "Edward," I said, "I am the woman who gave birth to you. I am your mother." He stared at me, his face blank with incomprehension. "But you are Miss Grey," he said. "I am," I said, "and I am also your mother. I was very young when you were born, and circumstances made it impossible for me to keep you. Your father brought you here to raise you as his son, to give you a life I could not provide. But I never stopped loving you. I never stopped wanting you." The room was silent. Edward looked from me to the Duke, then to the Dowager Duchess, his small face struggling to process what he had been told. "So father is still my father?" he asked finally. "Yes," the Duke said firmly. "I am your father. That has never changed." Edward turned back to me. "And you are my real mother?" "I am," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He was silent for a long moment, and I braced myself for his anger, his rejection, his hurt. But when he finally spoke, his voice was small and wondering. "Is that why I have your eyes?" he asked. A sob escaped me, and I nodded. "Yes, my darling, that is why." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around my neck, and I held him, feeling his small body against mine, breathing in the scent of his hair, and I knew that nothing else mattered. Not scandal, not reputation, not the cruelty of the world. Only this, only him. The Duke knelt beside us, placing a hand on Edward's shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I am sorry for all the years we kept this from you. But everything we did because we love you." Edward pulled back from me and looked at his father, then at his grandmother. "I do not understand everything," he said slowly. "But I know you all love me. And I love you too." The Dowager Duchess rose and came to us, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are a remarkable boy," she said, touching his cheek, "and you will grow into a remarkable man." Later that day, I met with the blackmailer. The Duke had wanted to come with me, but I insisted on going alone. The meeting took place in a small coffee house near Covent Garden, and the person who arrived was not at all what I had expected. She was a woman of middle age, plainly dressed, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. She sat across from me, her expression wary, and I recognized something in her face. Desperation. "You wrote the letter," I said. She nodded. "I did." "Why?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I am drowning in debt," she said quietly. "Because my husband died 2 years ago and left me with nothing but bills and 3 children to feed. Because I worked in this house once, years ago, and I overheard things I should not have. I am not proud of what I have done, but I have no other choice." I reached into my reticule and withdrew a small purse. The Duke had given it to me that morning, filled with enough money to satisfy her demands, but I did not hand it to her immediately. "I understand desperation," I said. "I understand doing things you never imagined you would do in order to survive. But I need you to understand something as well. The boy at the center of this secret is innocent. He is 7 years old, and he has just learned the truth about his birth. If you expose him, you will destroy his life. Is that something you can live with?" She looked at me, and I saw shame flicker across her face. "No," she whispered. "No, I could not." I placed the purse on the table between us. "This is enough to pay your debts and give you a fresh start," I said. "Take it. Use it to care for your children, and never speak of this again." She stared at the purse, then at me. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "Because someone was kind to me once," I said, "and it saved my life." She took the purse, her hands shaking, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." I rose and left the coffee house, and as I stepped out into the spring sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years. The threat was gone, the secret was safe, and more importantly, Edward knew the truth, and he had not turned away from me. When I returned to the townhouse, I found Edward and the Duke in the garden, playing with a wooden ball. Edward looked up when he saw me and ran to me, throwing his arms around my waist. "Mother," he said, trying out the word, tasting its shape. I knelt and held him close. "Yes, my darling," I said. "I am here." That evening, the four of us took dinner together in the small dining room. It was the first time we had sat at the same table as a family, and though there was still awkwardness, still uncertainty, there was also something new, something that felt almost like peace. The Dowager Duchess raised her glass. "To truth," she said, "and to second chances." We drank, and I met the Duke's eyes across the table. He smiled at me, a real smile, warm and unguarded, and I smiled back. After dinner, I tucked Edward into bed, and he looked up at me with sleepy contentment. "Will you stay?" he asked. "Will you always be here?" "Always," I promised. He closed his eyes, and I sat beside him, watching him drift into sleep, and I thought of all the years I had lost, all the pain I had endured. But I also thought of this moment, this perfect, fragile moment, and I knew that it had all been worth it. The Duke appeared in the doorway, and I rose to join him. We stood together in the dim hallway, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Thank you," he said finally, "for fighting for him, for not giving up." "He is worth fighting for," I said. He reached out and took my hand, and I let him. "We are going to be all right," he said quietly. "All of us." I believed him. Not because the future was certain, not because all our problems were solved, but because we had faced the truth together and survived it. We had chosen love over fear, honesty over appearance, and that, I knew, was enough. Years later, when Edward was a young man preparing to inherit his title, he came to me one evening as I sat in the garden at Ashwood Hall. He was tall and handsome, with my eyes and his father's bearing, and I felt such pride looking at him that I thought my heart might burst. "Mother," he said, sitting beside me, "I have been thinking about the story you told me when I was 7. I smiled. "Have you?" "Yes," he said, "and I want you to know that I am grateful for your courage, for your love, for everything you sacrificed to give me this life." Tears pricked my eyes. "You owe me nothing," I said. "You are my son. That is all that matters." He took my hand. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to say it anyway." We sat together in the fading light, surrounded by the roses that bloomed every spring, and I knew that despite all the pain, all the secrets, all the years of separation, we had found our way back to each other. And that was the greatest victory of all. The truth had set us free, and love, in the end, had been enough.